Thank you very much for coming here tonight. It's a great pleasure for this event celebrating the first edition of the complete works of Primo Levi, translated into English. And well, thinking that Primo Levi is one of the decisive writers of the 20th century, I think this is a great event, not just for Italian culture, but for the American reading public.
So part of what makes Primo Levi's work so significant, from my perspective as someone who teaches the Holocaust, is that in his classic memoir of Auschwitz, it was first published in Italian in 1947, and then in English translation in 1959. And so in this way, he became one of the first authors to bring an account of the death camps to a wider European and American audience. And I'm sure, as many of you know, the original title of this work was changed to Survival in Auschwitz in the first English edition from Levi's chosen title, If This Is a Man. And I think this is perhaps a perfect illustration of the need for a new translation of his work, because it's clear, as I'm sure many of you know, just how much more fitting the original title is, since the book is largely a meditation on what a human being is in conditions of extremis.
What we hadn't realized until we started really, I mean, what I certainly hadn't realized, and nor had Bob, was that Levi's work had been published in English in quite a piecemeal way. I mean, the major books had been published, If This Is a Man, The Truce, The Periodic Table, If Not Now When, and some others. But Levi wrote he wrote lots of stories and essays, which he himself collected in Italian into particular books. Whereas in English, people had taken like three stories from this book and 4 stories from that book and sort of put them together, and then many of the stories, or a certain number of the stories and essays, hadn't been published at all in English. So when we saw that this was the situation, I said, well, first of all, we have to translate the things that haven't been translated. And once we started thinking about that, it just made sense to retranslate everything, because otherwise it seemed to me it would be just the questions of tone and era and everything would be, a little bit messy. So that's how it started.
My experience with Levi really sort of started as an interpreter at a conference at NYU in the mid-'80s, shortly after the death of Primo Levi. And the big topic, of course, was the book that I translated, The Drowned and the Saved. And there was an immense criticism of everything. That was my first exposure to a certain style of translation criticism from Italianists who wanted everything to be very literal, and they insisted that you could not translate the gray zone as the gray zone, and that the drowned and the saved should have been the submerged and the saved, for all sorts of bizarre reasons. There was a sort of literalism that attached to what Italianists were expecting of Levi, and I think thankfully we've moved away from that.
Every writer is hard to render in English. Every Italian writer, every writer in another language. It's always hard to render anything in English. But I think with Levi, the particular challenges, at least for me, although in a funny way, Michael, you had the least of this, was the science. I mean, he's a scientist, and he writes about, he doesn't just use scientific words. He describes scientific processes. He talks about experiments. And if you're not a scientist, it's hard to understand a lot of that. And to find the balance between, for example, using ordinary words, using scientific words, that's difficult. He does use a lot of odd words, unusual words, sometimes scientific ones. He has 2 essays actually called The Language of Chemists, in which he talks about the vocabulary available to him that is not available to an ordinary writer. So that to me was really, I think, the biggest challenge. And the fact that his sentences are they're complex. I mean, they're carefully structured and complex, and to render that in English without making it awkward or too long or too short, or getting the syntax right, I think that was another big challenge.
I have to say with Levi, when I started, I had done a lot of works that were more contemporary, sort of more voice-driven, and his work was much more literary on the page, and I thought that actually meant it sort of cemented the meaning, that I could see just on the page the way the words were placed, and I could figure out the meaning just on paper. and so I didn't have to be listening in particular to it. But I found it very difficult. One, because sometimes it's just unbelievable what he's talking about. And I'm not talking about the reality of the camps. I'm talking about the language that he uses to describe them. I think the word that shocked me, that daunted me the most was a simple word. I know the meaning in Italian, sorprendente, surprising. But to describe your entrance into Auschwitz as surprising seems to be taking understatement to a whole new level. You know? And so I think with Levi there was this sense of disbelief at the words that he would use. They were there, you knew them, and you're like, why the heck is he saying, you know? I think I was criticized actually for not translating the word avventura as adventure, because I'm like, well, and I think it was just, I just couldn't believe that he was saying that in a way. So I think that there was that sense of the language that he was using and how far away it was from my own sensibility and my own dramatic inclinations maybe. There was a lot of quotation, and there was a lot of implicit quotation where you'd be sort of indirectly quoting the great Italian writers. I remember coming across the word allegrezza, which in Italian you would say allegria. You will find allegrezza in Petrarch, maybe. And then you think, well, why did he do that? And there was a lot of quotation and then a lot of sort of stitching in words from a very literary register in this. And apart from that, I think that there was a heaviness to it. You know, I mean, the things that he was talking about, you could only do so much every day, because no matter how intellectual an exercise you want to make it, there's tremendous pathos that just exudes from the prose and that it enters into your bones, and you do have to put it down and maybe take it up another day.
In the first days of January 1945, the Germans, under pressure from the approaching Red Army, had hastily evacuated the Silesian mineral basin. While elsewhere, in analogous conditions, they hadn't hesitated to destroy by fire or weaponry the lagers, together with their inhabitants. In the district of Auschwitz, they acted differently. Orders from on high, apparently dictated by Hitler himself, decreed that they retrieve, at whatever cost, every able-bodied man. Thus, all the healthy prisoners were evacuated under frightful conditions to Buchenwald and to Mauthausen, while the sick were abandoned to themselves. The Germans' original intention to leave no man alive in the concentration camps can be deduced from various clues. But a violent nighttime aerial attack and the speed of the Russian advance led them to change their mind and to flee, leaving their duty and their task incomplete. In the Bunamanowitz infirmary, 800 of us remained. Of these, around 500 died of their illnesses or of cold or hunger before the Russians arrived, and 200 others in spite of aid in the days immediately following.
Of course, the most substantial material for reconstructing the truth about the camps is the survivors' memories. Regardless of the pity and the indignation they arouse, they should be read with a critical eye. I mean, this is not just a witness, okay? This is a powerful thinker and a powerful writer.
Well, I just wanted to end with a quote from Primo Levi that I found here. I couldn't find it in the Italian original because it was in an article done by Stuart Wolf, who translated If This Is a Man, and who met Primo Levi at the beginning. Well, Primo Levi was very keen on translation himself, and he said, one cannot know one's own language or use it correctly if one doesn't know other languages. It's a concrete, even a tangible experience, above all, for one translates. Thank you very much.